Thank you very much, everybody. Our next session is focusing on the Old Vine Registry. And the Old Vine Registry is a relatively new launch, which we developed in collaboration with Jancis Robinson. The Old Vine Registry is a natural evolution of the Old Vine Register that Jancis Robinson initiated over a decade ago on jancisrobinson.com. And Jancis Robinson was one of the, I'd say, leaders in highlighting the value of old vines as both a cultural, agricultural, and genetic resource. We launched the Old Vine Registry, which is a fully searchable database of vineyards earlier this year. And we wanted in this session to be able to reflect on the initial feedback and information and analysis that we've been able to do from the basically the record keeping. So whereas the Old Vine Conference is about discourse, tastings, and community events, the Old Vine Registry is a free to use crowdsourced registry of vineyards. And we think this is really important because we value what we name and we value what we record. And in the preparation for this session, I was talking to David Morrison, who's joining us in this session, and he said something that really struck with me, which he says is that it's a really precious thing that we protect our genetic heritage. And by having a registry such as this, it allows us to start to keep records and at least to start to record as best we can these vineyards, which are the arcs of the genetic heritage of wine. And as we've heard from some of the earlier sessions, we need these genetics. We don't know what we can't afford to lose. So this is the thinking behind the Old Vine Registry. I'd like to introduce you to our panel. It's my great pleasure to have with us Alder Yarrow, who, among many other talents, really took and drove and facilitated the incredibly smooth build and launch of the Old Vine Register as a piece of technology and software and database. I'm really pleased to have with us as well Gilian Handelman, who's VP of Wine Education for Jackson Family Wines, and whose support allowed us to start the registry, and also David Morrison, who combines a background in science and botany with an interest in wine data. We're going to be focusing this session really sparked by a really fascinating article that David Morrison wrote on his amazing blog called Wine Gourd. You can geek out for hours. And in his article, he looked at some of the early data that we had registered and started to query it as a data expert would do. And it really made us think about, it shows how important it is we have this, what we have that's valuable, what data we have that's missing. And we want to really use this session as a call to arms for all of those watching, either live or on catch up, to get engaged with this registry. It's free to submit your old vines. So I'm going to pass over now to Gilian and Alder, because they've got some interesting insights on some of the most successful sort of or the most completely filled in aspects of the Old Vine Registry, so the idea here is that basically, I'm going to ask Alder to share the Old Vine Registry for a particular region that, as Gillian pointed out, has done really well, and this is Lodi. So over to you, Alder and Gillian, and then we will come to David and actually look at how he's started to interrogate the data.
Okay, great. While Alder's pulling this up, I just wanted to, first of all, say what a great pleasure it is for us to support this. Kind of seems remarkable that Jancis and crew only began to bring global attention to the importance of these old vines several decades ago, right? I think Americans in particular, but human beings as a general rule tend to live in the present. And so it's super important to bring back the past and to consider, how relevant it is. And thank heavens for people like Rosa Kruger, Laura Catena, the Torres family, people who've kept these old vines intact. So we can go ahead and I'm going to switch it over to Alder. With big thanks to him. When this is what happens when you put a data wonk and a person with high wine intelligence together, you get something like this. So Alder, what are we looking at?
So I've just brought up a couple of the pages here on the Old Vine Registry. One of the wonderful things that we have is the benefit of a region like Lodi having done a whole bunch of groundwork, in advance of the existence of the Old Vine Registry. So Lodi has a Heritage Vines project where they have been busy cataloging the incredible wealth of old vines that they have in the region. And they had a database sort of ready to hand to us, as have a few regions around the world, where we just basically got a spreadsheet with all the information that we could possibly want and need about all of their old vine vineyards. And we also have the wonderful benefit of the photography of Randy Caparoso, who's a wine writer, former sommelier, who works with the Lodi Wine Commission and has photographs of all of these vineyards. So in some ways, the Lodi portion of the registry is the most complete of any region we have around the world, given that we have photographs and the data about the vineyards, including in many cases the various wineries that that make wines from the vineyards. So really wonderful collection of information about these old vines in Lodi, and in particular benefiting from the efforts that region has undertaken to catalog and understand the old vine heritage that they have there.
Yeah, that further underscores what Sarah was referring to, which is, has it made any difference in the consciousness of the consumer, the awareness of old vines? And Lodi is just a perfect example because it's undergoing a renaissance with this enviable range of old vines that so many people are clamoring for. Or you think about Cucamonga, for instance, with old ancient Palomino. So there's a really remarkable work being done here, and thank heavens.
Yeah, and there's so much more work to do. We have big gaps in the registry, as Sarah alluded to. We are pitifully poor on the vineyards of the Rhone Valley, for instance. Chateauneuf, of course, is lousy with great old vine vineyards, and I think we only have a handful. Likewise, Rioja. And so we're doing our best to reach out, at a grassroots level, like in conversations such as this today, to sort of raise our hands and say, hey, get us some information, as well as contacting regional bodies to the extent that we can. And as you've heard from some of the other panelists in the earlier sessions today, sometimes those records just don't exist. Whereas the folks in the Douro, for instance, had a big database of 600 vineyards that they could just give us, and we could import wholesale. In many of the countries in Eastern Europe, all those records were lost, in the fall of communism, if they existed at all. And so, the whole point behind this registry is to be a crowdsourced thing where anybody can come on and submit a vineyard, which you would do just with the link in the bottom of the site here, and give us as much information as you can about these vineyards, and we can get them into the database. So appreciate the help of anybody and everyone who's listening, and the folks that you may know that you could put in contact with us to submit that information. But we do have a lot of information, and some of it is super interesting, and I think that's the point of having David here. He's, as a statistician and data analyst, he's done a deep dive on some of this stuff, and he's come up with some super interesting insights.
Well, I'm not so sure about that, but I'm glad everybody is interested. Obviously, my own personal interest is one thing. But I'll just preface what I should say by pointing out that my training is a biologist. And therefore, my interest in the Old Vine Registry is, of course, as a record of the biodiversity that we have preserved or are attempting to preserve. In a national park, for example, we have a list of the species that are there because that's the biodiversity that we're preserving. That doesn't work in cultivated crops. You need the sort of thing that the registry is as a record of what cultivars have been preserved where and how long, what era they are being preserved from. So my interest here is in the biodiversity preservation aspect as a biologist. So obviously when I look at the database itself, my interest is in two parts: what information is already there and what information is missing, because it's a registry. I mean, I've done lists of species in plant species in national parks. We know we don't find everything, but you try and find most of it. But when it comes to something like this, the question always has to be, as we've been alluding to, how far have we come and how far have we got to go before it becomes what it should be, what it needs to be, as far as I'm concerned. We need something like this, and I'm very happy that people are creating it. I mean, congratulations to you and the others for attempting to do this sort of thing. I think it's great. But obviously, in my blog itself, I did a couple of posts about the registry and got a hold of the data and looked at it. And my interest in the second post, which is the one we're starting to look at here, which is the one that has the graphs in it. For some of the main wine producing countries, I just graphed the two pieces of basic information that are there. Obviously, a graph like this, it tells you the recorded age of the vines, so we know what era the biodiversity is being preserved from. And of course, the size of the planting, because, I mean, preserving 2 plants is great, but I mean, that's not really sustainable in any sensible meaning of the word. So the graphs are populated with points indicating each entry in the database from that particular country. As far as the numbers at the top are concerned, this says France 98 out of 142. This says that only 98 of the record out of the 142 records actually has information about either the age or the size. One of those pieces of information is missing. So when you look at this, the 98 tells you what we've got. The 142 tells you a bit more about what we've got, but it doesn't tell you, obviously, what's missing. So when I look at a graph like this as a data scientist, I say, can 142 really be right? This can't be even close to being complete for what actually exists in a wine-producing country like France. So the disappointing part of a graph like this, to me, is that 142 is quite small. But clearly, this does show you that there are vineyards more than 150 years old, and that's absolutely great. But of course, I think there are vineyards older than that, although France has been through World War I and World War II and has lost an awful lot of its biodiversity in the process through no great fault of its own. But if we move on to the next graph, for example, with Italy, I mean, the word atrocious occurs to me. If this was actually the complete set of records, I would go around to the Italians and kick them in the pants very, very hard. This has got to be database absence, I presume, from your own experiences.
Can I just come in on that and say,
yeah, absolutely.
We've had incredibly proactive engagement from Italian old vine growers in terms of taking part in tastings, hosting field trips, all the fun stuff. There are amazing old vine custodians in Italy,
yes,
top producers, and for some reason they're not, it's like registry, that's a bit dull.
Yeah, we need the
if you want to come over and we'll show you an amazing time.
Well, yes, I'd love to have an amazing time, but I'd also like to see a few bureaucratic attitude people and kick them in the pants.
Come on, Italy.
Yes, come on, Etna, come on, Campania,
Funnily enough, in fact, so I have to confess, we got the registry up and going, and it was when I came across and was reading your blog, and I thought, just a minute, I really need to, bend a few ears in my Italian contingent. And it can simply be a question of getting to the right person, getting into a region that has the information, they get it up on there, and then it starts a connection, because once one region is up, they all want to be up.
Yeah.
Yes, although, what's interesting is that we've run into an issue, like just as an example, in Uruguay, and not to pick on them, they actually have amazing data in Uruguay compiled by ANAVI, which is the central organization there. But there are laws in place that prevent that government organization from giving us that data about individual landowners. And so all they're able to do is provide us with some contact information, which is pretty spotty, to be honest, from an electronic perspective, of their growers, and to have us sort of, reach out and say, if you have old vines, please send them to us. And that yielded some entries for Uruguay, but unfortunately, legally, the government just can't hand us over that database in the way that the folks in the Douro were able to, for instance, or the folks in Importa in Spain were able to just give us hundreds of entries.
Yes.
Those are those socio-political wrinkles that I think David has been finding in some of his data, right?
We'll keep scrolling.
Spain. Well, in the case of Italy, if someone wants to give me some money, I'm very happy to go to Sicily and Etna. Again, I've been there several times. I will personally go around to each vineyard, taste their wines, and try and get the data for you.
You're taking
one with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I know that there are, but for example, Alessandro Toccoli at Civita del Bere has initiated a census of old vineyards in Italy. I don't think there's any shortage of interest. Isn't it interesting? So we get this incredible tool, and it is only as strong as the engagement and the commitment of our colleagues in wine to say, we believe this is important and we need to log it. I do think it's important, and we're going to talk about that as we go. But right. So David Morrison is prepared to sacrifice himself and go and log the old vineyards of.
My wife will come with me. Don't worry. But
seriously,
I mean, if
David,
you move on,
you should come on a field trip with us.
Absolutely. Don't forget to mention the next one. So obviously, Spain has done a lot better, although I think this is still presumably only a proportion of what actually could be there.
Yes. This is really the effect of having a region like Importa be able to wholesale give us that data. We'd love to get the same thing from Rioja, which obviously would probably double or triple this number easily from Spain.
That was the genius of the historic vineyard society here in California, is they already had a real start on it. So kudos to them.
Yes.
Yep. The next one's Portugal, isn't it? Is that right? No, sorry. Yeah, the New World has obviously done reasonably well. Both the United States and Australia do seem to have a lot. I have no idea what you feel about the volume here compared to what there should actually be.
Boy, that's hard to say. I mean, Gillian, I'd be interested in your perspective. I think we have pretty good coverage in California. I think much less so in Oregon, Washington, and New York. There's doubtless a whole bunch of older vines in the Finger Lakes, for instance, that we don't have recorded here yet. But working on it. Definitely a higher percentage here than in Italy.
Yeah. Well, in places like Australia, I mean, there's a great deal of sort of national pride in databasing these sort of things to demonstrate that Australia is not the end of the world.
Yes, and just like in Importa in Spain, we've got a great database from the folks in McLaren Vale, for instance, who've given us a whole bunch of information, but much less so in the Barossa, which has obviously got some great old vines to give.
Yeah, well, it does depend on when the place was first planted. I mean, that sort of thing. Obviously, things didn't sort of start in the Barossa and places like that. They did start elsewhere en route. But, it's very easy to find information about old vineyards in Australia. As I said, there's a national pride in having this sort of stuff.
It's so interesting you should say that, David, because we have found as an organisation, both as the Old Vine Conference and with the Old Vine Registry, in many cases, it's actually some of the not exactly the younger, but maybe, the younger into our consciousness wine countries who have been the most determined and rapid to get on board. And I think that, as you say, with Australia, it's a point of saying we do actually have heritage, guys. Whereas, France, come on, France. We do have a small network of wonderful supporters in France. We're hearing from Clément tomorrow, who have the only vineyard classified as a national monument in France. But I think sometimes when you are surrounded by a sense of heritage or tradition, you can almost take it for granted. But I think really the commitment to saying that we value this and therefore we are going to note it, we are going to record it, it's worth a little bit of investment of time. And the Old Vine Registry is completely free to use and to register. So that's Australia.
Portugal, as I started to say earlier, is the oddest one of the lot. Two massive bursts there of particular claimed age for vineyards. And
something was happening. Something was happening in 1930 and in 1970 in Portugal.
Socio-political.
Yep.
Very much so.
This is not biology, this is sociology, this one. And that is, I think, also an aspect of what we're talking about. I mean, a lot of this is the social aspects of getting people to put data in the database and things like that. It's not so much do you have the data, but are you prepared to spend a few minutes giving it to us and things like that.
There's been some really interesting comments and questions in the chat that I'd like to read out to you. And
absolutely.
Okay. So Wink Launch, hi Wink. She says, vignerons who really should be the ones adding their info are just buried in paperwork already, so not sure they want to put more time aside for this. We need to find wine students to help, perhaps. That's a very good point. You can have the registry. What do you put around it to actually then help harness the data? We do. I mean, Alder leads an incredible volunteer team, but we're always looking for more volunteers. So the Old Vine Registry is non-profit. The Old Vine Conference is a non-profit. And if anyone would like to give any little bit of their time to help support the uploading of records to the registry, you will receive eternal thanks. And I think a mention in the thank you page. And at some point, probably a big party, but maybe
it's true. It's the age-old story of the old farts and the upstarts, right? You have a lot to learn from the old farts, so let's go.
Okay.
Doesn't the world have a lot of excess wine just at the moment that we could be giving people as presents for providing us with data at no cost to ourselves?
Drain the Australian wine lake by giving it to people who register vineyards.
The first thing we do is get the Australian excess wine people on board.
Wow. A really good comment from Michelle Shaw. Thank you for this, Michelle. So Michelle Shaw is our regional ambassador for Italy. She says that Matteo Bellotto has registered all the Friuli Orientali old vineyards. And she said, I'm sending him emails. So again, that Excellent. Is data ready to go. Eva Bellagamba in Tuscany, very old. I love this. All the Italians are up in arms now.
Well, I hope so. That's the point of the graph.
Beverly Bodan, yes, this is a great comment. I've met so many producers in Italy who are guardians of heritage and original vines. Yes, me too. Perhaps the metrics of other wine groups not so important to them. I admire the vineyard preservation of Fior di Montone in Sicily, Cristana Tiberio in Abruzzo. Yes. Italy is one of the leaders, I think, in this. Of course, it's the center of the slow food and slow wine movement. So yes. Felipe Pato says, yeah, we've got the order. I think Alder, you may find a bit of an ingress of applications.
Excellent.
Portugal. Yeah, there's some.
I hope so.
As you say, in these sort of 2 years, basically in 19 is that 1970?
1930 and 1970, for whatever reason,
1930 and
are the two
1970.
most common planting years in the Douro, which is the majority of our Portugal data. So I don't know whether there was some government incentive. Felipe Pato says we had the dictature. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but yeah, there clearly was some mandate or some subsidization that happened that allowed people to make plantings in 1930 and 1970. As you go through the data, it's just, you know, one after another, and most producers actually have one vineyard planted in 30 and one vineyard planted in 70. Just boom, 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 one after another.
So Felipe Pato says yes, the dictature was 1932 to 1968.
So it sounds like planting before, no planting during, and then planting after.
Yeah.
Chile.
I mean, the other ones here are just South American ones until we come to the last one, which is Germany. I mean, they're sort of what you might expect if people haven't shown a lot. Once again, you're wondering how much heritage there actually is here that we could be seeing if they would actually database the full records.
Oh, yeah.
There's
we're
far
working,
more.
actually,
Look at South Africa.
I mean, this is really not representative in South Africa of being one of the leaders. And huge. Actually, we're in a really good dialogue with the amazing Old Vine Project team in South Africa to also include their data. And of course, I should say someone like the South African Old Vine Project has an incredible register of their own. And I think, of course, that takes resource to maintain. And I think that the value, though, in coming together in this registry is you just make a bigger impact. And also you can collaborate and encourage these international research, which I know that Rosa Kruger is extremely keen to do, and which she's going to be speaking about tomorrow. So we launched the Old Vine Registry. We all felt really pleased with ourselves, and actually it was really, I'd like to thank David for pointing out that, well, come on, you know.
As I said, this last one is the one that disappointed me most, which is why it's the one at the end of my list of graphs. Yes. I mean, this can't be even close to approximately.
No.
No, I mean, Schloss Johannesburg alone was planted in 1100, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, they must have some of the longest heritage of all, really, and have preserved quite a bit of it.
Yes, although it's worth pointing out, because this question does come up, that we are interested in the vines, not the vineyard. So we do have some people who submit, 1812 vineyard, which is when the vineyard was established. But if there are no living vines from 1812, it doesn't count. So we're interested in the age of actual living vines rather than the date of establishment of a vineyard.
Yeah.
And 35 years is the marker.
Yeah,
yes, and 35 is the minimum.
We're interested in.
Yeah.
Not the geography so much. I mean, it's not the key thing. Where it is important, but what it is far more important.
And I think it's worth just recapping how the Old Vine Registry is managed, how we work. We're a bit like an honesty bar in how it works. Would you mind just sort of recapping how people can submit, what the criteria are, how they can really make the most of the entry and be most helpful, etc., Alder?
Sure. So just a team of volunteers, people donating their time to do all of this, with the exception of the lovely folks who helped us build the thing, which we of course paid to do that. But in terms of maintaining it on a day-to-day basis, it's myself and Tam Curran and Benjamin Rolfs from the from Jancis Robinson's team, with the help of Sarah and Belinda from the Old Vine Conference. It's set up to work a little bit like Wikipedia, not entirely, in the sense that you can't literally just go in and add something to the registry and have it appear a second later. But anyone can go in and submit. It's designed to be crowdsourced. So there's a form that I showed earlier where someone can submit a vineyard on the site. We're gradually enhancing each of those listings. So like last week, we just had the ability for you to put the latitude and longitude of the vineyard in. And if you are able to do that, that will spawn a link that will allow somebody to look at the vineyard on Google Earth, which is a fun little addition. But you can put it as little or as much information as you have about a vineyard. The key things that we need are, of course, the planting date, the location of the vineyard, and the name of the vineyard, and to the extent that you are able to tell us the grape varieties and the size of the planting, although those things aren't required to have a vineyard be listed in the directory. And people can submit individual vineyards, or in the event that you have an organization or just your own efforts that would allow you to submit a large number of vineyards at a time, we can give you an Excel spreadsheet that would make it easier for you to enter that data. You can simply contact us through the website, and I'm happy to provide that to you. And in the spirit of crowdsourcing, this data is freely available to anybody who wants it. So like just in the case of David, the source for his article, he said, hey, how could I get access to that Old Vine data? And I just literally exported and sent him a spreadsheet of all the vineyards. So anybody who wants a data extract from the registry can get one at any time. So the criteria for inclusion in the registry is 35 years or older. That's an age that we've chosen both in accordance with a number of Old Vine organizations around the world, but its genesis is in the idea that that's the average age that vineyards are grubbed up and pulled out around the world. So anything that's survived past that point, we consider to be old vines. Are they really old at that point? Maybe more adolescent than old, but at that point, they're statistical survivors. And so that was the minimum age that we had for inclusion in the registry. So anything planted in 1988 or later, and in a couple months, it'll be 1989 and later. So please do submit. I have added vineyards to the registry simply by conversations that I've had with wineries, or even looking at a back label and saying, oh, look, they say this is 110-year-old vines, and doing a little Google research to go find out information from the winery, and then just manually submitting that information to the website. So I would encourage any wine lovers and drinkers to do that sort of thing as you come across them. We'd really appreciate it. Did I miss anything, Sarah?
You've got everything. Had a couple of really interesting questions that tie in with some of the discussions that we've had behind the scenes, Alder, which is, so Cassia Dubla, is a vineyard regrafted on old vines considered old? And from a similar theme, Rebecca Miles Steiner, can you clarify also about can you clarify on the age of vines in terms of root systems and above ground structure? My understanding is that many of the vines in Santorini have very old root systems, but almost the entirety of above ground part of the vines are renewed every few years. Or in the case of old root systems that are grafted over in the vineyard. We've been talking about this, and and I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't think we've decided.
Yeah, I mean, I think our general approach is that, the root system is the original plant. And I think in the case of Santorini, there is, pretty credible claim that those are, 100-plus-year-old vines. And in those cases, those aren't grafts, right? As the commenter said, they snip that basket off every 30 or so years as the sap flow gets restricted, and a new cane grows from that same root that has been in place for a long time. I think grafting qualifies, right? If you've got 100-year-old vines and they were Carignan and you've grafted them over to Cinsault or something else, I think that vine is still alive and growing in the ground, and its root system is hundreds of years old. So for the moment, we're saying that those qualify as old vines.
Yeah, that's where the vinous DNA is in that scaffolding of the root system.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're definitely preserving that part of the biodiversity. As I said, from my interest is in recording that's what we have. Obviously, the more information you can put in the database about what's been grafted on and things like that, the better. But that can't be the criterion for choosing whether you're in or out.
Yeah, and we are currently at the stage really where we are operating like an honesty bar, we are aware of thinking into the future of how we get to the point of a sort of a validation or a checking of entries when we get to the point where the Old Vine category is becoming so powerful that it might attract dishonest entries. We're thinking ahead. We're really at the stage now where we just want to make this matter. We want to make this characteristic as important in the wine conversation as the method of winemaking, or as the varietal, or as the region. And what's really warming about this is we've got lots of comments from people saying, I'm registering. So Eva Bellagamba, you have very old Tempranillo. That's it. I've tasted your wine from Michel Char. Okay, registered and linked.
Excellent. Yes. And by the way, we put up some statistics earlier around that we got 2 entries from Peru yesterday. So we now had 1 more country to add to our list. And I think actually the gentleman who submitted those has been listening to these conversations this morning, Carl. Yeah, bring it on, people. Keep me busy entering data into the database, please.
We've also had some kind offers of volunteer assistance, Alder. So we will follow up with you. And so thank you. David, thank you for joining us. Please, everyone, I highly recommend David's blog. It's completely fascinating, so well written, and a different perspective on wine. I warn you, but actually, no, I encourage you, pour yourself a nice glass of wine and just, sit there for 2 or 3 hours reading it. It's really great. Alder, thank you for joining us, and of course for everything you do. Complete pleasure and privilege to work with you on this. And of course, Gillian, thank you. Always lovely to work with you. And I know that this sort of sustainability and connecting communities is very important to you personally as well. So I'm going to wrap up this session and then move on to our final